I'm like to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Bud Nissen, um, and Todd and Randy Nissen have asked me to do a little background history of the cabin. I guess they think I'm not going to live too much longer, so as a result, they figure that I should give you a little history of the background of this place, so that that history really doesn't get lost. Um, my dad and my uncle Lowell Theory were the original owners of the cabin. Back in 1913, after this country had been logged off by the Edward Hines Lumber Company, Edward Hines Lumber Company elected to sell off some of the land. And my dad, Boynton and Lowell Theory, came up here and bought part of a 40 right here on the river. This is the east fork of the Chippewa. Um, that was in 1930, and then that was during the Depression, and money was pretty scarce. My dad was working at the Pabst Brewery Company as a millwright at the time. Lowell was unemployed, and so Lowell, being he was single, and a fellow by the name of Galley, and I'm sorry I can't quite remember his last name, but Lowell and Galley came up here. He was an old bachelor, and decided to start building the cabin. So they lived in a tent off on the back end here, and start building the main room of the cabin out of logs that they pulled out of the river that were left over from the logging days. Pull the logs up, let them dry, and then they would try to, with a broad axe, try and shape them as best they could, and they built the main room of the cabin. Long about October, things were getting pretty chilly in this country, and they had the walls up and the floor in, but they didn't have any windows. So they put burlap bags over the windows, and that's where how they stayed in the cabin. Well, later on, they finally managed to get enough money together with my dad's help, because he had a job, and they framed in for the windows, put them in, but they didn't have enough money to really buy frames. So they built the frames, put them in, then they went and got little strips, of wood, I should say round branches, as straight as they could, did the bark off them, and that's what they used for the window stops. They put the window casings in. And I guess they thought they were really in heaven, because now they had a cabin that was enclosed, and they elected then, because there weren't any jobs, to spend the winter of 1930 and 31 here. They had an old Model T truck. At the beginning, there wasn't any road that came in here, such as there is now. But across the river here, and of course now, how many 60-some years later, there was an old logging road that followed just along the river here, probably about anywhere from 20 to 48 feet in, and went all the way on down to where the bridge is, where we come in. And that was how they hauled all their lumber in. That old Model T truck, of course, that had a real, was high with its big wheels. And then they brought the stuff across the river. They had a big iron wood cook stove that they brought in that way. And some of the lumber, of course, there wasn't a lot of lumber. Most of that was for the floor, because even the roof rafters here are all made out of poles from the local trees. So a lot of the original room was really pretty much a gathering from the land, so to speak, and what was left over from the logging days. Why they didn't elect to build the road first, I don't know, but they didn't. Maybe it's because they were trying to beat the bad weather. Finally, they did build a road in here, and that winter, Galley and Lowell stayed here. Lowell let his hair grow. He looked like like not what we would consider one of the Beatles, and in style. At that time, of course, that wasn't the style, but at least it kept them warm. They pretty much tried to live off the land, being as it was Depression. They deer were yarded up and they were hard to find in the deep snow, but they did manage to kill a deer once in a while. They would take the battery out of the Model T truck, and Lowell would go across the river here. He had a knapsack built for his back that actually had a strap that went around his head and then down to a little sack that he had, and that's how he carried the battery. And he would walk over through the woods at night, over the hill here, to a farm over there owned by a fellow by the name of Marion Knowles. Obviously, the attraction was a young lady, as there always is. And Lowell would go over there, and the reason for taking the battery was Knowles didn't have any electricity in those days, and they had a radio, and it was battery powered, by a car battery. Other than that, they had kerosene lights. I guess I'm getting bit by a little bug here. Sorry about that. But anyway, Lowell would take the battery, go over there, and supposedly so they could all listen to the radio. Well, I think after Marion and the rest of the family went to bed, Lowell and I think the young lady probably got to do the things that young people do. Anyhow, then he would walk back here, getting home probably 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. The next day, he'd put the battery in the Model T and start it up and let it run a while. So we'd charge up the battery again. So the next night, it was the same routine again. That went on for that winter of 1930 and 31 that they lived here. My dad came up whenever he could, but that wasn't very often because, as you can picture what the cars were like in those days, was a long 12, 14-hour trip. The road was paved up as far as Prentice. From Prentice on, it was all gravel. And I would say Prentice from here is probably somewhere between 50 and 60 miles. Now we're fortunate we have paved road almost right up to our driveway. So the cabin, in those days they only had deer hunting season every other year. So every other year they would come up and do their deer hunting and try to get up once in a while on a vacation in the summertime and take care of the place. Well, in 1947, Lowell was in the service, and my dad thought it would be best if they could add on to the cabin. So in 1947, the war had just ended, and he added on the front porch and the kitchen in the back. About that same, well, I should back up a little bit, I'm sorry. Before the war, a fella came up here by the name of Joe O'Neill, was a friend of theirs, and hunted with them. Joe O'Neill liked the country so much that he wanted to build a cabin. So they sold a little piece of land next to him here on the river to Joe O'Neill. Well, things went along pretty good for a while, but then there seemed to be some differences of opinion. Things weren't getting along too well, and there was a lot of friction. Anyway, going back from here one year on at deer season, Joe O'Neill had a very bad automobile accident. He was hurt quite seriously. Well, that was a time to kind of bury the hatchet. So they went to the hospital and visited him and sent him flowers. And that kind of helped cement things over in the relationship a little bit. But Joe, realizing he wasn't really too welcome down here, elected to sell the cabin, and of course gave Dad and Lowell the first chance to buy it. He left here and bought a little cabin right down here by the bridge where the river crosses the road. The cabin was then sold to a man by the name of Rich Goldberg from Grafton, who had been coming here to hunt with Dad Lowell and other fellas, along with my Uncle Clarence, a fellow named Perry Hansen, who worked with my dad, and another fellow by the name of Walter Kettner, who was a customer of Milwaukee Green. So that kind of brings us up to the date right here now. The next sitting we'll try to bring you up a little bit further on from the pre-World War II days. Okay, we're now kind of in a second phase here of our history lesson, so to speak, for the cabin. We think we left off before somewhere around the World War II era. Anyway, at that time, Lowell theory who was half owner of the cabin, as I said before, elected to sell out because he wanted to buy a cabin where he could go with his family, maybe a little more plush than this. Remember that when this cabin was originally built, there wasn't any electricity here at all. Everything was Coleman lanterns, and of course we still have the outside bathroom. The water at that time was strictly out of the river. The water was super clean, of course, at that time. This is the only stretch of quiet water, was at that time, from right below the cabin here was rapids, and upriver, probably about 5 or 6 miles, is rapids coming out of Blaisdell Lake. So they had really had the only access to quiet water on this, in between these two rapids. And so fishing was very, very good here. Muskies, walleyes, and so on. Anyway, Lowell sold out of the cabin, sold out to my dad. And my dad, as I said earlier, made the improvements of putting the front porch on and the kitchen on the back, jacking cabin up, putting in new foundation, and so on. That made quite a big improvement. Then we got a generator, so we could generate our own electricity. I think that we're getting into some bad sunlight here, and I'm going to ask if I can break it off here for a little bit. One of the things in my looking around here that I would like to certainly make mention of, and I think is a very, very critical part of the history of this cabin, is Todd is taking a picture on the front of the cabin of a sign called saying home. That sign was made out of birch by old Galley, the man who helped them build this cabin. And that was on the face of the original cabin. And he sat at the kitchen table during that first winter of 1930 and 31 and whittled that out because time was very heavy on their hands. Made that sign home. Wouldn't tell anybody what he was making until he was all done. Then he nailed it up on the front of the cabin. Of course, as you can see now, it has been moved from the front of the original cabin out here to the front porch that was built in the 1947 area time. I believe that that sign would last some, 65 years, but because it's under the eaves and sheltered. And I guess everybody has always thought of this as home. And that home has meant a great deal to all of the fellows who come here. Anyway, getting on with the history a little bit here. Dad took over the cabin, and we started making a lot more use of it. Dad started having fishing trips up here. He would bring a bunch of fellas up here, Elmer Stetler, Kenny Lees, Bud Broughton, many of the fellas that worked for him, and they would come up here fishing Memorial Day and Labor Day, and then of course a lot of them came back for deer season in November. There were always little incidents that took place along the way. One of them, of course, that always comes to my mind, was Mr. Goldberg, Rich Goldberg, who lived to the ripe old age of, I believe, around 95. Rich's doctor told him he shouldn't drink too much beer. So Rich decided if he'd only drink a half a bottle at a time, he wouldn't drink as much. So whenever Rich would come up here, he'd say, I'm only going to have a half a bottle of beer. Well, everybody had opened up a bottle, he'd say, I'll split it with you. I'll split it with you. We wound up drinking more beer than anybody else. So they nicknamed him Split a Bottle Rich. As Rich got up in years, his wife had passed away, but Rich stayed up here many, many summers, and he had an old chair right out here where the road splits off between coming here and his cabin over there, and he used to sit out there and just look up and down and enjoy the outdoors in the woods. After Rich's passing, we kept that chair out there just as a memory to him. But like all good things, somebody came along and stole the chair. Really wasn't worth anything to anybody. It was just an old kitchen chair, but it certainly was a great memorial to old Rich. But anyway, Rich wound up owning the cabin totally alone. Down through the years, Harry Hansen, Walter Kettner, Clarence Nissen sold out their shares to Rich, and then he did a lot of remodeling and fixed it up pretty nice. Back to this cabin, my dad passed away in 1951, and my brother Jack and I inherited the cabin at that time. We built the garage out here in the back, cleaned out a lot of the brush around the cabin, and made it a little bit more usable. We didn't use it as much as we really would like to, but we put the fireplace in and so on, and it really made it a nice place to come fishing and hunting with a bunch of guys. Then, I guess about the early 60s, Jack elected to go to Hawaii, and I couldn't really take care of this place alone. I had an apartment building in Milwaukee, plus my home, plus my mother had the place over here in Bass Lake, plus having this, and I couldn't take care of it alone. So I called 5 other fellas together that were the old mainstays in the cabin. There was Walter Schmidt, who had been coming here from the time he was quite young and in the service, before he went into service in World War II. So Walter must have been in his early 20s. So I called Walter Schmidt, Fred Wendt, who had started to come here probably in the late 50s and early 60s. He, Ernie Kierzik, who started coming about that time. Vid Sparrow, it's another one, Tony Kubik, ball player for the Yankees. Anyway, the 6 of us got together and we elected to split the cabin, buy Jack out, split the cabin into 6 owners. We drew up a few little agreements, shouldn't even say drew them up. In the beginning they were all verbal, just what rules we would live by. And we tried to keep them pretty simple because I've seen lots and lots of hunting clubs and cabin partnerships come and go down through the years, and we didn't want to fall prey to them because they all lasted 2 years to 5 years, and that was about it. Well, anyway, back in the early 60s, when we formed the thing, we had a few little personal agreements on the thing, verbal. Things went along great for a few years. Tony Kubik got married, got a place of his own up in northern Wisconsin here, I guess over in Phelps. Tony elected to leave the cabin group, so he sold out, and my brother Jack in the meantime came back from Hawaii, and Jack bought back into the cabin by buying Tony's share. So Jack's been back, I guess, into the cabin since the late 60s, early 70s. Excuse me, the cabin is still owned by that 6 fellas, and we've always gotten along fantastically, never had a problem. So I guess basically you say we've been together for about 35 years as owners, plus some of us have been together for close to 50 years coming here. Sorry to say, last January, I believe it was the 25th, one of our members, Vid Sparrow, living in Florida, had a massive heart attack and passed on. And so we've purchased his share from his widow, Catherine. And we'll decide come this next deer season at our annual owners meeting as to what we're going to do with that share. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful relationship down through the years. Back right after World War II, a power company came in and decided to put in a power dam downriver. You can't see that dam from here, but they backed up the water. You see a little ripple right out there. Todd can maybe get a shot of that. That little ripple right out there represents a big rock under the water. And we used to be able to walk on some rocks out to that, stand on that big rock and fish. So that'll give you some idea. They raised the water level probably about 5 feet. Back water here, and at that time they wanted to buy the cabin for my dad and buy Rich Goldrich from him, and both Rich and my dad got together and said, no, we don't want to sell it, just don't flood us out. And they agreed that they would always take cautions to be very careful about that, and they have been excellent. Part of the agreement of flooding our land was that they would bring electricity into the cabin. So that was back, I guess, about 1946 or 47. They brought electricity in. That didn't mean we got it free, but we did at least have electricity. We were able to do away with the power plant. Power plant was kind of a little funny story in itself. At night, when everybody was getting ready to go to bed, the last guy going to bed. Looks like our wood pile is kind of coming down a little bit, but don't let that scare you. Anyway, the last guy going to bed would have to go outside and shut off the light plant. Well, that wasn't too bad in the summertime. In the wintertime, when it was cold, it was kind of a miserable job. And if you go outside and turn the gas off on the lighting plant, it would run for about 3 minutes before it would stop, just from the gas that was left in the carburetor. Well, everybody would dash to jump into bed real quick and not be the last guy. So the last guy would have to get on his boots and his coat, make sure he had his teeth brushed and everything and ready to go to bed. Come out here and he'd turn off the generator and run like hell to get in the cabin, to get his boots and coat off and get in bed before the lights went out. And of course, if you got up during the night to go out to the outhouse, that was strictly a flashlight affair at that time. That kind of brings us up to, let's say, to date here to some extent. I'd like to kind of take a little break here, and we'll come back and try and put some highlights into this thing from the days leading up to today. But that's just a pretty quick caption of the whole thing. But we will go back and get into a little more detail in one of the later filmings.